Так, добрый день, глубоко уважаемые коллеги.
Distinguished colleagues, distinguished guests, Professor Sangster, I'm glad to see you. And we're beginning the panel session for the defense of the thesis by Ripsime and Bagdasaryan. The thesis is submitted for the academic degree of the candidate of Sciences and Economics. The specialization is 080012, Accounting and Statistics, and the topic of the thesis is the evolution of double entry bookkeeping in the first century of its application. Under the order issued by St. Petersburg State University as of June 5th, 2020, I, Dina Lvova, Doctor of Sciences and Economics, Associate Professor, and Acting Head of the Department of Statistics, Accounting and Audit of St. Petersburg State University, have been appointed the chairperson of this dissertation board. The order also approved the candidacies of the members of our board, and allow me introduce them. First of all, Vitaly Kovalyov, Doctor of Sciences and Economics, Professor of the Department of Credit and Theory and Financial Management of St. Petersburg State University. Then Marina Sidorova, Doctor of Sciences and Economics, Associate Professor, Professor of the Department of Audit and Corporate Reporting of the Faculty of Taxes, Audit and Business Analysis of the Financial University under the government of the Russian Federation. And the following members of the board are working in remote mode: Vyacheslav Sokolov, Doctor of Sciences and Economics, Professor of the Department of Accounting and Analysis of St. Petersburg State University. Vyacheslav, do you hear us and see us? Yes? I'm happy to see everyone. But unfortunately, some of you are wearing masks, though therefore I can't understand who you are. And is Vitaly with you? Yes, that's Vitaly. Okay. So I recognized him. Okay. And Alan John Antonis Sangster, Professor of Accounting History, University of Aberdeen, UK. Профессор, вы нас слышите? Пожалуйста, скажите что-нибудь. And our candidate for the degree, Ripsime Bagdasaryan. We also have the thesis supervisor, Marina Gorskaya, candidate of Sciences and Economics, Associate Professor of the Department of Accounting, Audit and Automated Data Processing of the Kuban State University. Distinguished colleagues, those who are working in the remote mode, in order to improve the quality of our connection, kindly turn off your microphones and don't forget to turn them on when I give you the floor. And I would also like to inform you that the panel session of the dissertation board is being recorded and broadcast on St. Petersburg State University website, and it is also interpreted into English. Currently we have an email address posted on the page, on the internet page, with live broadcast of the board session, and all listeners can submit their questions to Madam Bagdasaryan online, the questions regarding the thesis or scientific discussion. These questions will be forwarded to me by our technical service, and I will read them out during the discussion. The questions must be related to the presentation and the content of the thesis, and don't forget to give your name and position if you want to submit a question. The questions that have nothing to do with the scientific discussion or dissertation or assessment of the dissertation, these questions will not be voiced. And under the order on the procedure of granting academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University, approved by local normative acts, the session of the dissertation board is valid, providing 2/3 of the appointed board members are present. And the number should be not fewer than 4 people. Our dissertation board consists of 5 people. Everyone is with us today. including 2 members of the board that are working remotely. We have a multimedia connection with them, and therefore I can say that we have a quorum. And before we start the procedure of our defense, I would like to give you the agenda. Our session should not last more than 2 hours, and it is as follows. First comes the chairman's presentation about the documents submitted by the candidate for the degree and their conformity with the requirements. He replies to questions if there are any. Then dear colleagues, unfortunately we should declare a break because one of the members of the board lost connection with us. Okay, we continue. The technical break is over, and Vyacheslav is with us. Once again, as for our agenda, short report of the chairman on the documents submitted by the candidate for the degree and their conformity with the requirements. Then a candidate's presentation, providing an overview and findings of the research.
Соискателю предоставляется не более 15 минут на доклад. Вопросы к соискателю строго по докладу. И большая просьба ограничивать время на вопрос не более чем 2 минутами. Ответы соискателя на вопросы, я думаю, что мы не будем устанавливать здесь жесткий регламент, но в пределах, конечно, разумного. Выступление всех членов диссертационного совета поочередно со своей оценкой диссертационного исследования и выступление соискателя с кратким изложением своих позиций, с вопросами и предложениями к диссертанту, а каждому члену диссертационного совета будет предоставлено 10 минут для выступления со своей позицией. Выступление председателя со своей оценкой диссертационного исследования, тот же период времени отводится. Ответы соискателя на вопросы и замечания членов диссертационного совета около 20 минут. И открытая дискуссия, то есть выступление по желанию присутствующих на защите диссертации с изложением своей позиции или с конкретными вопросами и предложениями к диссертанту строго по теме исследования. Тоже прошу придерживаться регламента в районе 2-3 минут на выступающего. А всех желающих выступить просим зарегистрироваться в регистрационном листке, а перед выступлением полностью представиться в связи с тем, что у нас ведется запись. А также, далее будут озвучены вопросы в адрес соискателей, если таковые придут по трансляции. Ответы соискателя, следующие по регламенту. Выступление научного руководителя соискателя около 3 минут, тоже на выступление. Обсуждение членами диссертационного совета перед открытым голосованием результатов защиты. Примерно 5 минут, и открытое поименное голосование с принятием решения о присуждении или не присуждении ученой степени. И завершит наше заседание заключительное слово соискателя. Итак, уважаемые коллеги, есть ли вопросы по поводу регламента или возражения? Если вопросов и возражений нет, позвольте приступить к ведению заседания и предложить краткий доклад о предоставленных документах и о диссертации соискателей. Итак, диссертация Рипсime Arturovны Bagdasaryan на соискание ученой степени кандидата экономических наук по научной специальности 08-2012, бухгалтерский учет, статистика, на тему «Эволюция двойной бухгалтерии в первом столетии ее применения» на примере подлинных бухгалтерских книг средневековых компаний, принято к защите приказом ученого секретаря СПбГУ от 3 июня 2020 года номер 5017/1. Рипсime Arturovna Bagdasaryan написала свое диссертационное исследование на базе Кубанского государственного университета. Научным руководителем ее является кандидат экономических наук, доцент кафедры бухгалтерского учета, аудита и автоматизированной обработки данных Кубанского государственного университета Марина Михайловна Гурская. Количество публикаций соискателя, в которых излагаются основные научные результаты диссертации, согласно представленному списку, 10 работ, а в рецензируемых научных изданиях из перечня утвержденного Министерством образования и науки Российской Федерации 3 публикации, в изданиях, индексируемых в наукометрических базах данных Web of Science и Scopus 5 публикаций. Соискатель представил ученому секретарю СПбГУ полный пакет документов для принятия к рассмотрению и защите диссертации. Все документы соответствуют пункту 12 порядка присуждения в Санкт-Петербургском государственном университете ученой степени кандидата наук и ученой степени доктора наук. Все представленные соискателем документы по полученной мной информации от куратора соответствуют требованиям и хранятся в аттестационном деле соискателя. Копии их есть у сотрудника отдела по обеспечению деятельности диссертационных советов, который сейчас присутствует на заседании. А перед тем, как предоставить слово соискателю, если, уважаемые члены диссертационного совета, у вас общие вопросы к соискателю, в том числе есть ли необходимость оглашать и рассматривать весь список предоставленных соискателем документов на защиту. Прошу ответить, есть ли вопросы. Нет вопросов, так? Хорошо. Тогда предоставляю слово соискателю для краткого доклада. Рипсime Артуровна, вам слово.
Уважаемый председатель, уважаемые члены диссертационного совета и присутствующие. Вашему вниманию предлагается диссертационная работа на тему «Эволюция двойной бухгалтерии в первом столетии ее применения» на примере подлинных бухгалтерских книг средневековых компаний. Наиболее результативный период исторических исследований в области бухгалтерского учета, основанных на реально сохранившихся материалах, пришелся на первую половину XX века. В силу определенных...
Рипсime Артуровна, простите, пожалуйста, придется, наверное, начать еще раз, потому что у нас снова технический перерыв.
Хорошо. Уже можно? Уже можно?
А почему перерыв? Слышно замечательно. Да, сейчас ничего не слышно. Извините, это Соколов, если вы меня слышите. А почему перерыв, собственно, вот видно хорошо,
Вячеслав
но звука от вас нет.
Да, Вячеслав Ярославович, а вы нас слышите?
Да, абсолютно хорошо, прекрасно. Никакого перерыва.
Технический
Все
перерыв.
замечательно.
Да, и сейчас...
Громкоговоритель так орет, что у меня жена злится.
Угу. Ну вот сбой технический произошел, сейчас подождем, пока наладят, и снова продолжим.
Алан куда-то там исчез, похоже. Нет, вон
да,
тоже
у профессора
он есть.
Алан, да, Санкт.
Кто-то из кружки, да, все хорошо.
Угу.
Вообще это фан, конечно.
Раз, два, три, четыре.
Профессор Сангстер, do you hear us? Профессор Сангстер, вы нас слышите?
Yep, I can hear you, but it's in Russian. When there was English being spoken, I had a problem because someone else was speaking in Russian at the same time, and it was very difficult to actually hear what was being said. But certainly, I can hear you.
Окей. То есть получается, что...
Dina,
Вы слышите русскую речь и английскую речь одновременно?
На английском, Дина, я думаю, он не понял. Дина Алексеевна, я думаю, что он не понял, вы по-русски его спросили.
Перевод должен быть. So, Professor Sangster, do you hear us properly, or you hear at the same time Russian language and English language, and it's not very easy to...
I can hear you now very well. When there was an English translation being done, I could hear the other person speaking as well at the same time. Or it was someone who was speaking who wasn't meant to be speaking. I don't know which it was, but it made it very difficult to hear the English.
Oh, okay.
But when you spoke on your own there, Dina, I could hear you very well.
Oh, okay, thank you. I think they will do something right now to correct this translation.
If it is easier, you could carry on with the Russian only and just tell me when it is my turn to speak. Because I have read the dissertation. I know what's in it.
Okay, and did you receive translation of my speech from Russian into English?
That I could not hear.
Huh? Sorry?
No.
No?
No.
Oh. That's a pity. It could be a problem.
You just tell me the bits that I should know, Dina, that'll be fine.
It was some official details before the defense, but it's very important to translate anything from Russian into English.
Professor Sangster, do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, but it's an echo on it, but I can hear you, yes.
Professor Sangster, do you hear me?
Yes, I do.
Professor Sangster, you chose the translation and you press the button to choose the English translation, and also you have a tick there to turn off the original sound. You should turn off the original sound as well, otherwise there will be a duplication of sound, both channels, Russian and English. Please try to turn off the original sound.
Where do I have those options?
You have this globe button to choose interpretation. Globe button. Do you have it?
No, I'm afraid not. I'm using a Macintosh computer, and menus are maybe different. I have audio settings. There's nowhere I can see anything about translations. Sorry.
Professor Sangster, can you choose both Russian and English channel, or do you have just one channel that automatically goes to you? If you have an opportunity to choose interpretation, then you should choose English channel and then turn off the original sound.
I cannot see anywhere that I can choose between channels of sound. I'm sorry.
О, кошмар. Ну да.
I would recommend that we proceed as we are. I will be able to follow what there is. As long as there is some sort of translation, I can follow it.
Тяжкий плотный занавес у входа, за ночным окном туман. Где твоя постылая свобода, страх познавший Дон Жуан? Холодно и пусто в пышной спальне, люди спят, и ночь глуха. Из страны блаженной, незнакомой, дальней, слышно пенье петуха. Что изменнику блаженства звуки? Миги жизни сочтены. Донна Анна спит, скрестив на сердце руки. Донна Анна видит сны, чьи черты жестокие застыли, в зеркалах отражены. Анна, Анна, сладко ль спать в могиле, сладко ль видеть неземные сны? Ночь пуста, бездумна и бездонна. Выходи на битву, грозный рог, и в ответ победный влюбленно в снежной тьме поет рожок.
Ой, Вячеслав Ярославович, простите, пожалуйста, я вас перебью сейчас. Да, нужно решить
Это
вопрос.
был блок, нам просто надо было паузу заполнить. Извините.
Да, спасибо.
Yes, I hear the English channel.
Вот он слышит английский канал, но при этом я слышу себя. Он слышит английский канал, сейчас услышал английский канал, но при этом я слышу себя. Или может где-то здесь громкость моего микрофона? Ну-ка, давайте. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 English channel. Professor, do you hear the English channel? Professor?
Yes. Yes, I hear the English
Да,
channel.
он сейчас слышит, а я не понял, может, все уже нормально? Мне кажется, все нормально.
Да, Вячеслав Ярославович, вас не очень громко слышно.
Сейчас я увеличу громкость на...
Он, короче, меня слышит.
Извините, на разговаривание.
Да, я думаю, да.
А вас не слышно совсем. Я не слышу.
Просто сейчас микрофон выключен, когда выключен, то слышно никого.
Distinguished colleagues, the technical break is over and we continue. I beg your pardon for the technical failure that we had due to the interpretation. So we can continue our session, and I believe we should ask our candidate for the degree to start once again. So Ripsime, please, you have the floor. Please give us the main results, the main scientific findings. A distinguished chairwoman, distinguished members of the board and guests, my dissertation is dedicated to the evolution of double-entry bookkeeping in the first century of its application on the example of authentic accounting books of medieval companies. The first half of the 20th century is the most productive period of historical research in accounting based on authentic materials that remained. Due to certain circumstances, Soviet and then Russian scientists did not take part in these studies. Foreign researchers, primarily Indian ones, have collected valuable material that makes it possible to see the real genesis of double-entry bookkeeping. Unfortunately, the interest in archival research gradually faded in the second half of the 20th century. The results of studies performed by eminent academics are recognized and not questioned. In the recent years, archival studies were renewed. Russian scientists, along with Western researchers, actively participated in them. Professor Mikhail Kuter developed and applied original methodology, namely the reconstruction of accounting complexes based on logical analytical block diagram modeling. This approach gave us a lot of previously unknown results, and these results were recognized by the international scientific community. Working on my research, I studied and collected materials in the archives of Florence, Venice, Genoa, and Prato, and as well as the Central Library of Florence. A separate study of double-entry bookkeeping evolution is associated with the study of books of Datini, second company in Pisa, in 1394 and 1395. As the research has shown, a lot of authors wrote about their value, but the peculiarities of organizing and keeping record in individual enterprises and companies of Francesco Datini in Pisa were not addressed properly. Scientific publications lack information that fully highlights the significant contribution of the developed accounting methods used to register the business transactions in the companies of a medieval merchant. In this regard, the obtained results are interesting for scientific development, and the selected topic is considered relevant. I used literary sources as well as archival medieval original copies, including the scripts of companies that use double-entry bookkeeping, in particular second company of Datini in Pisa. in order to consider and identify general patterns and scientific features of the development of accounting procedures and methods of testing the main double entry elements. In course of research, I managed to formulate the provisions and findings which are offered for the defense. We define significant differences between the books described in the treatise by Luca Pacioli and those used in the early Dettini companies. Pacioli recommended 3 books, the Memorial, the Journal, and the General Ledger. In the company we studied, the accounting was mainly carried out in 3 books, the Memorial, General Ledger, and Monetary Book, Entrata e Uscita. The General Ledger followed a strictly established order. First accounts receivable, then accounts payable. They were followed by trial balance pages, then several empty pages, followed by accounts for the purchase and sale of goods and the profit and loss account. The balances of accounts receivable and accounts payable were transferred to the trial balance in the order in which they were given in the General Ledger. The Memorial gave systemic and non-systemic records. This accounting register could contain any information, both corresponding to other books of accounting system and also simply recording some significant events. The cash book, or book on cash inflow and outflow, recorded cash flows. Money received and Entrata was recorded in the first half of the book. The second half of the book reflected the payments. Uscita. Cash ledger accounts were linked to accounts in the General Ledger. We determined the procedure for placing account balances in the trial balance and accordingly in the balance sheet sent to Prato. The modern requirement that assets in the balance sheet are to be located opposite to the sources from which they were acquired did not work here. Active positions were placed in order of decreasing liquidity, cash, receivables, and goods for sale. In the creditors section, the reserves created from profit were indicated first, then the account balances of identified suppliers of goods, persons providing specific services, and other creditors by name. Then the list was continued by the balances in which not specific creditors, but the goods supplied, services provided, which led to the emergence of payables, so they were indicated then. And in the second company, we had the balance with the distributed profit. And this differs significantly from the Dettini companies in Barcelona, where a balance with profit before distribution was applied, which is more in line with modern practice. The entries, either in debit or credit, ended with the discrepancy between the debit and credit balance results. The excess of the property amount over the amount of passive liabilities was added to the reserve from profit. Otherwise, the difference was perceived as accounts receivable until the errors were clarified. We found that, unlike other Dettini companies who used only an external balance, for example, companies in Barcelona, the second company and all subsequent companies continue to compile an internal trial balance and external reporting. And it is proven that the internal trial balance in all respects corresponded to the balance of the Balancio de Libra type described 100 years later in Pacioli Treatise on Accounts and Records. It was a real trial balance in the form of a bilateral account, providing the coordinates of the accounts in the closing and opening general ledgers. We demonstrated the contribution of the second company in Pisa to the development of the method of calculating the financial result, which means that accountant formed a method of calculation of the operational result based on an inventory of the remainder of the batch of unsold products and goods and its assessment on the cost of purchase. As a result, the debit of the purchase and sale account took into account the full cost of acquisition and preparation for sale, while the credit considered the contractual value of a part of the sold lot and the cost of the unsold remainder of the lot. And this improved the reliability of the calculation of operating result and the balance of the account transferred to the balance. The slide shows an example when the full cost of goods purchased is reflected in the debit of the account. The credit reflects all sales of this type of product. When forming the balance, there was a need to close the account, and the accountant estimates the balance of goods and gives this indicator on the credit of the account and transfers it to the trial balance. He subtracts the cost price from the sum of two indicators of the account credit and writes the difference in the debit of the account as profit received for this type of goods, and in the credit the accounts of the account as profit from trade. We also discovered that unlike the individual enterprises of Datini and Pisa, where operating results for each transaction were accumulated on special one-way operating accumulative accounts, operating profits and losses were given separately. In the second company, the operating results were attributed directly to debit or credit of the bilateral profit and loss account. The profit and loss account, in this case, consisted of 4 accounts, folios, renewed upon the closure of the previous account. Other profits and losses in exceptional cases were accumulated on specially designated accounts. Only the final folio had operating gains and losses, as well as the totals of individual dynamic lines of accumulation of other incomes and losses. And the latter circumstance turned the account opened as profit and losses from trade into a prototype of the modern profit and loss account. We maintain that Francesco Datini's second campaign in Pisa used a logically organized cash accounting system. The book Entrata e Uscita consisted of 2 separate sections for cash inflows, entrata, and cash outflow, uscita. And this book recorded individual cash receipts and expenditures from both the memorial and the general ledger. The totals for each section were calculated periodically, and the second company accountant was not consistent, and at different times he calculated the balance of cash at the end of the entrata section, then at the end of the uscita section. The slide shows the transfer of the accumulated total of received cash on the page in entrata to the page for identifying the balance, which is found in the uscita section. As the analysis of the recorded business transactions showed, in each interim accounting period there was a paradoxical situation. The amount of cash given exceeded the amount of cash received, and at the same time the accountant did not give an explanation for this. We describe an early mechanism of registering non-cash settlement transactions through a bank using bills. Settlements with bankers were recorded in the correspondence of the counterparty's account. With the banker's account, we found no financial advantages of the promissory of such bills. The use of bank settlements was significantly reduced. They has significantly reduced the need for cash on both sides, on all sides. We described also the mechanism of early correction records formation. It was noted that adjustments were not made to specific accounts with wrong entries and were not marked as wrong. All adjustments were made directly in the profit and loss account using simple one-way entries. And attempts to use double entry for these purposes confirmed the incompetence of early accountants in this point. And the slide shows a diagram of the profit and loss account, and you see red ellipses mark the adjustment entries on this account, these corrections. We described the early practice of reflecting the results of the property inventory. In particular, surplus stocks were given to the debtors section of the trial balance and the profit section of the profit and loss account. The aim of my dissertation was aimed to improve the understanding of double entry bookkeeping. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to our candidate for the degree for her report. Are there any questions on the report? Just on the report, the questions should reflect the basic provisions of the research, and members of the board can ask questions as well as everyone present and the participants. that are working with us remotely. So, any questions? So, please. Marina, please. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I have two questions on the first part of your report. So when you mentioned the compilation of balance with distributed or non-distributed profit, you gave an example from two companies. You were mentioning the second company, the tiny company that you studied, that they had a distributed profit balance, and in other companies of the tiny, they used other method of how do you explain it? What do you think? What's the difference here? Indeed, in the company that we studied, second company, there was a balance with distributed profit. So it was reflected on the accounts of owners. In Barcelona, in the tiny companies, the balance with undistributed profit, and it was reflected as a balance on profit and losses taken from the general ledger. The difference is that each company had its own accountant, and they had different vision on the balance compilation. So that is the difference as far as I see in the method. Okay, second question. Dealing with such a term, you mentioned that the difference between the debit and credit was transferred to the account, as you called accounts receivable. So is it written like that in old Italian, or is this account titled? Well, we interpret it this way. It means accounts receivable of the accountant for the company. And that's our interpretation, because these accounts had no specific titles. And how was it closed? Until the mistake was detected, it was closed. If the mistake was found, the corrections were introduced. So, and if the mistake was found, they just withdrew the sum from the accountant. Yes? Yes. Vitaly has a question. Ripsime, could you please tell me, how do you explain the choice of this company for research? Well, in fact, the archive of Francesca Dattini is very rich. And there are a lot of complexes of accounting books in which you could find something interesting. And at the point when I joined the PhD course, there was a start of Dattini studies in Pisa, and I believe that this company was very interesting and they had a lot of materials for work. Therefore, it turned out that my scientific advisor and I decided to choose this second campaign in Pisa. Thank you. Other questions? So, Professor Sankt, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, could I ask a question at this point?
Да, я хотел бы также задать вопрос.
I'd like to ask,
Я бы хотел
you just
спросить,
answered a question on selecting the company and why you selected the company. But at any point, did it prove difficult to follow what was being written in the account books?
У нас перевод полагается?
Was it hard to understand what was written in the account books?
Сложно было ли понять?
A little bit because of translation.
Я не пойму, просто не понимаю.
Okay, let me put it another way. The account books are written in medieval Tuscan dialect, and they use a special type of handwriting, which then has to be transcribed and translated. Did you ever find it difficult to follow, make sense, understand the translation of the entries, or was it easy to understand them?
Были ли сложности с переводом?
Just a moment. Mhm.
Ну, на самом деле нам повезло. Всё, хорошо.
Indeed, we were lucky to work with an accountant that worked with with this company because he was quite accurate and his handwriting was quite accurate as well. Therefore, understanding the sums and the text was not that difficult. The books were of good quality, so we were lucky to have them.
Thank you. And can I ask one more question
Спасибо,
at this
еще один
point?
вопрос.
You didn't mention it, but the Detini used a memoriale which was in a Tuscan form. It wasn't the same as the Venetian one. So in what way would Detini's memoriale have been different from the one described by Pacioli in his treatise,
Я поняла.
which was Venetian?
Отличие заключалось в том, что мемориал, который описывал Пачоли, к нему имели доступ очень большое количество людей, то есть там могли делать различные записи, пометки, в принципе, все работники предприятия. А у Франческо Датини, у мемориала была четкая цель, то есть он отражал системные и хронологические записи, то есть там отражались события, которые происходили внутри компании, и отражалась информация по счетам, то есть там было четко. Thank you for the question.
That's okay. Could someone tell me what the answer was?
Что?
Did you receive an answer?
No.
Professor, do you hear? Do you hear me, Professor?
All I heard was the Russian.
Я переключила сейчас. Господи, да что ж.
Нам нужно повторить ответ на вопрос профессора Сангстера?
Professor, do you hear the English channel? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Professor, do you hear the English channel?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Все наладилось. Повторите, Рипсime, повторите ответ.
Что?
Все наладилось.
Я не слушаю. Все нормально?
Да, сейчас он услышал. The difference between the memorials were that the memorial that was described by Pacioli, the amendments could be added by those amendments were not described with business that describe not the business process only. And as for the Tini Memorial, it had specific goals. They registered systemic entries and chronological entries, and there was no excess information in them. And the entries of Pacioli were transferred to the journal, and in the Detini company they had no journal. Did you hear, Professor?
Yes, I did. Thank you very much.
Other questions? Yes, we have a question from the audience. No, Dmitry, please come to the microphone, otherwise we won't hear you. Dmitry Nazarov, associate professor from the Financial University. I would like to ask the following thing. Do books and account registers of the Tini company, do they have any demonstrations of the mistakes that were found? For example, did other accountant or auditor check them, or maybe the owner checked them? So how do you find these corrections? Do these books have any references to the mistakes? Just 1 second, I'll flick to the slide. Well, the books were checked by the accountant that worked in the company. And on the slide you see this in red, these mistakes that were found by the accountant after the closure of the books of the main of the general ledger. So there was external account report that was sent directly to the owner. It was sent to the owner, to the office, to Prato. And the Tini could check, but there was not a framework, there was no regulation for that. And indeed, that's an interesting topic of correcting of these correction entries, and it's very interesting to see how they did it. So they used the same ink, the same color. Yes, just the same, but they did not introduce the corrections where they found the mistakes. They didn't touch the accounts in the general ledger. They corrected them on the profits and loss account. So let's have a look at the red Alps, where the sum is 2 florins and 14 dinars. So that's the account for purchase and sale of oil, and they forgot to reflect this sum in the expenses, and in order to correct this mistake, this sum was transferred to the debit of profit and loss accounts. And if we have a look at L8, L9, L12, we see that those were the corrections when the accountant made a wrong transfer, and this was a closure, and in order to correct this closure, he reflected these sums in the debit of profits and loss account. And if you have a look at the 428 sum, that's a doubled sum, because the accountant mistaken the places, and he took this sum to profits, and in order to correct it, he doubled this sum in losses, in expenses side. Thank you. Other questions? Yes, Vyacheslav. Turn on your microphone, please. Yes. I would like to ask the question. Well, first of all, I would like to mention that we have a new kind of session, and our dissertation board is now working without our Professor Kovalyov, and I believe we should remember him. He was my mentor. And that is why, you see, he always told me that we invite you to the board so because you ask practical questions. So allow me to ask 2 practical questions. And Mr. Nazarov has already mentioned one of my questions, because I wanted to make that one of the elements of novelty. You see this correction entries, but you've already mentioned them, some correction entries, and I want you to answer the following question. Why is it novel? Why is it novel? Were there no correction entries before the Tini? All these entries were done in a different way? Thank you very much for the question. Indeed, the first correction entry, the information on which we have, was found in the Francesca De Tini company in Pisa, in the second company, and it is given on the slide, L13, this indicator. You see, that is the first correction entry that we have information on. Before that period, we had no information, no publications. Thank you very much. And yet another question. Rather of a it's rather more of a terminological issue. In your work, you use this term, external report. For us, external reporting is something connected with the 20th century, stock exchanges, financial capital, and so on. What do you mean by this term, external reporting? Because for the what is this external reporting for the Detini period? Thank you very much for the question. External reporting in the Detini companies, in the company that we studied, was a kind of dual account. It contained information on the closing general ledger. It was compiled for Francesca Detini. That was in Prato at that point, and it was sent by mail there to Prato. So it contained information on the closing campaign. The company was opened for 1 year, and all the results were reflected in this external reporting, and they were provided to the owner. Thank you. Thank you for the question. Thank you. Other questions, if any? Okay, then just one short specification, because I'm curious. Yaroslav asked about the reporting. I wanted to ask about the registers. On the third slide you had, so please flick to the third slide. So that's the list of registers. Could you please tell me, was it an unchanged list, or maybe it was different in different time periods, and was there a division between the main and the auxiliary registers? Well, in the company we studied, there were 3 main registers: memorial, general ledger, and entrata and shita. And there were additional registers as well, like notebooks that reflected the information, all kinds of information. For example, notebooks that reflected some household expenses, or that reflected the information on acquired goods for sale. So those were additional registers. And if we take other companies, we can find a merchandise. The register for merchandise. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, as far as I understand, there are no other questions. Therefore, allow me to switch to the reports of the members of the board with their reviews and assessment of the dissertation, because as far as I understand, we had no external reviews for our thesis. So I give the floor to Vitaly Kovalyov. And if you don't mind, as all the reviews were published on the website of the university, I just offer to read the main provisions, the main questions that you had, and the main comments to the speaker, if you don't mind. I believe we should stick to this idea, and I believe we will also offer our speaker to answer the questions right after every member of the board speaks out. So please, Vitaly, you have the floor. Thank you very much. I'll just read the main ideas, as it was already mentioned, because the review was already published on the website of the university, therefore we already have it. So, first of all, I would like to mention the relevance of the topic, that the evolution of contemporary methodology of accounting is mostly based on the accumulated scientific and practical experience of the accounting thought, and Russian researchers had access to translations of foreign authors. And this research certainly is quite of high quality. It is describes good literature sources, and we see the development of scientific thought in Russia. And the study that we consider today, and the ones that we have access to today, is one of the elements of scientific work. And this is quite an interesting process, the work with authentic materials in place. The group of Russian scientists, headed by Professor Kota, created a professional team that is based on authentic accounting sources in the archives of medieval Italy companies. And this work is part of a huge scientific process, and the emphasis in the dissertation is being made on the archive materials, and this is a unique characteristic of the research. And the author has worked with authentic data of archives, not with reviews or descriptions that were performed by other researchers before. And this allows us to say that there is no subjective assessment of some or other factors that we have in the interpretations and review works of other scientists. And we've taken out the subjective and analytical part that can characterize any author of historic reviews, and this really makes the research by Ms. Bagdasaryan stand out. All the needed points of the review connected with scientific results, with the formulation of novelty, everything of that is described in my review. Therefore, I'll switch to reviews. I have a positive assessment of this dissertation, but I want to mark certain discussion points. The dissertation is actually a high-quality study of accounting in one of the medieval Italy companies. Considering the full research and very good quality of this research, I could not but mention that the conclusions are based on the accounting practice of one company, of a single company, and we should take into account possible mistakes in methodology and accounting procedure, and also some language peculiarities. And a certain reference should be given should be made on the competence of the accountant that was dealing with this process. Is it possible to extrapolate the practice of a specific company on the entire accounting procedure of that time? For example, if an accountant made mistakes in specific accounting issues, then having no sources in the archive, the author will be based on possible false data. And third, what is the influence of this research on the current state of accounting thinking and practice? Well, does it question the established perception of the history of accounting thought? Or maybe it corrects or introduces certain novelties? You have interesting peculiarities of this accounting, but what does it give us? Does it deny the mainstream thinking, mainstream views on medieval accounting, or does it correct specific conclusions? I would like to see a more pronounced opinion on this issue. Still, overall, the dissertation is an independent, high-quality, finished work, qualification work performed on a relevant and important topic. The dissertation of Ms. Bagdasaryan, the evolution of double entry bookkeeping in the first century of its application, meets the basic requirements established by the order on the procedure for granting academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University, and the candidate, Ripsime Bagdasaryan, deserves the award of the scientific degree of Candidate of Science and Economics in Specialization 01-0012, Accounting and Statistics, and the Clause 11 of the aforementioned order is not violated. Thank you, Vitaly. Thank you very much for your review. As a rule, Russian experts in the history of accounting are being guided by the words of Raymond de Roover that double entry emerged within a period from 1250 to 1350. And the question in what companies they use double entry is something that they don't raise, and it's particularly characteristic for Russia, where until the 21st centuries people didn't work in the archives of medieval books, and we maintain that in all Italian archives there are just two separate books, Giovanni Farolfi and Financiers of Massari for Genoa community, and certainly the accounting complexes of Del Bene and Francesco Dottini in Pisa, in Barcelona, Mallorca, and Valencia are of particular importance, and the scientific complexes in Pisa had formed the basis for methodology and accounting procedure that were transferred from Pisa to other companies. Tuscan Dottini practice represented the accounting of its time, and it's impossible to compare it with other companies because we lack archive materials. And the next stage of development of accounting is connected with Venice of the 15th century. Then, as it was marked before, there were no archive materials of other companies that allow us to summarize and compare the experience, but the studies of Ardettini archives in Prato and archives of other trade centers of medieval Italy, Florence, Germany, Venice, were performed within the recent 14 years, and the research is a component of comprehensive topic, and it covers not the initial stage of the formation of double entry, but a later period and a rather advanced period, and certainly it is of particular interest. And at the same time, we mentioned that the previous years were the years of tests and mistake corrections, especially if we talk about final balance on sales accounts and in finding operational results. And as a rule, such remarks are demonstrated in the majority of reviews, and there is an opinion that the Ardettini archives were studied well by Western scientists of the late 19th century and the start of 20th century, but a lot was written on Ardettini archives, and the majority of books did not have this in-depth research, and the use of this logical analytical modeling method allowed us to tie in the majority of economic operations reflected in many books into a unified complex, and based on that we saw the continuous development of accounting on various stages, and the stage that we considered is the fourth stage in development, and the methodology of accounting and procedure is really approximated with the contemporary approaches, and it's more advanced than the Venetian practice of the next year described in Pacioli treatise. And these reviews and remarks will be taken into account in my further studies. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now I would like to give the floor to Professor Sangster to give his review on the thesis.
Okay, thank you very much.
Большое спасибо.
I found this a very interesting dissertation.
Мне эта диссертация показалась очень интересной.
And it covers an extremely important
Она охватывает
period
очень
in the
важный
history of
опыт
accounting.
в истории бухгалтерского дела.
One that, to be honest, is extremely under-researched, and this effort by Ripsime and by Professor Kuta and his team as a whole is making significant difference to our knowledge and understanding of medieval bookkeeping and accounting. What I found most interesting was the way that this dissertation tackles difficult issues very well and very powerfully, so that the points that the English literature ignores are actually being looked at and addressed. Periodicity, which is the setting of time periods for each lifespan of a company's business before the next year. So basically it's yearly in most cases. That's something that the English language literature does not really acknowledge existed until much later. But Ardettini was exercising, and it's very clear in the dissertation that he was. I found the coverage of merchandise accounting very useful. It is something that is not understood either in the accounting history of Italy or the accounting history in English. So it's good to see that such analysis and such detail is being provided through this dissertation. The use of, the estimation of the cost of closing inventory was an exceptionally interesting point, and I was very glad to see it, because it was the first step by a business to move towards what we would normally do today. It took 500 or 600 years after Ardettini for that to become normal, but it was the first step. I've already dealt or covered the question about how easy or not it is to read the accounting material. But just looking at everything as a whole, I found that the contribution of this dissertation was exceptional. I have seen very few PhDs anywhere that make such significant contribution to their field of knowledge. Now that's partly because this is a very unexplored area. And I congratulate Ripsy and Professor Kutter and his team for actually taking the chance on looking at something that other people thought was frankly impossible. And I think this is a very good outcome that is seen here. There were a couple of weaknesses that I pointed out in my report. One was the writing up of the Bills of Exchange section, which wasn't easy to understand. But leaving that apart, I think that the rest of the dissertation certainly was easy to understand, and a little bit of confusion about summa summarum and balancios, which is understandable. Now, I would say that in the time period that we're looking at, there was no such concept as an annual report. There were no financial reports. The point that Professor Sokolov was making. There are no equivalents to current day reports, financial reports. And what was correctly identified by Ripsy was that the reports that Dattini received were for management purposes. They were not for anyone else. They were purely and simply for his ability, given the ability to manage, and I applaud you for doing that. So that's my report. Thank you very much for allowing me to take part in these proceedings.
Thank you, Professor Allen. Ответы Рипсиме Артуровны.
Thank you, Professor Allen. Действительно, здесь имеет место неточность. Конечно, пробный баланс Dattini в Пизе.
The trial balance of Dattini in Pisa was a balanceo, and it corresponds with Article 15 of Chapter 36 of the Specility Treatise. So here is a quotation from our Specility Treatise. And that is the principle that the Dattini accountant used to compile the balance in the general ledger. Summa summarum on separate pages was compiled in Barcelona, and this oversight was made just once, and in other cases we have correct interpretation, and this system of trial balances was described in Accounting Historian's Journal. And as for the examples that we studied, indeed there was no financial advantage resulted from the bills, because Dattini did not speculate the bill in bills of exchange, but instead he used them primarily as a means of moving funds from one place to another. And our results here do not coincide with the views of Reimann de Rober, and I believe I will continue the studies in this field later on. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now I would like to give the floor to Marina Sidorova. I would like to add to the words of colleagues. Certainly all the reviews were published on the website, and I don't need to read them. The study that we listened to today, it's a part of huge work that is performed by the Kuban University researchers, headed by Professor Kutter and Madam Garskaya. But at that, being part of this serious work, this work is separated. The work of Ripsime is separate. The dissertation specifically defines this zone of independent work of the candidate. I tried to find the page, but I didn't manage, unfortunately. And the PhD student had performed independent translation of a huge block of documents. And as for the use of archive sources, I would like to add the following thing. And the thing is that these sources, these are not just archive sources. They are dealing with a period where we had no explaining materials that explain the methods of accounting. They developed 100 years later, and you had just the books, and you had to guess somewhere, you had to understand the logic of these entries, and that is, I believe, a very hard work, and it deserves respect, all the due respect. And as a comments, I would like to give just 3 points. The first point, I believe that's not a question that you need to answer to. I'll just mention that at some pages of your thesis you had this emotional style. That is, you are being a bit too emotional. That's a young researcher assessing, giving assessments to the previous researchers. I believe you could stick to a more general, less emotional style. Second point is that certainly the thesis is filled with different accounting terminology. And as for me, I did not understand this word combination, postal reporting, and I didn't find the answer in the thesis. I didn't find the description of this term in the thesis. And the third point is more of an offer. When you use logical models, certainly they demonstrate the specific situation, the specific transaction or account, and even the interaction between these accounts. But as you used different books and different registers, in the end, I would like to see some kind of, general flow chart between these registers. But regardless, I would like to read my conclusion that the dissertation of Ms. Bagdasaryan, the evolution of double-entry bookkeeping in the first century of its application based on the real accounting books of medieval companies, corresponds to the main requirements established by the Order of St. Petersburg State University on the procedure for granting academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University. And the candidate Ripsime Bagdasaryan deserves the award of the scientific degree of the candidate of Science and Economics in specialization 080012, Accounting and Statistics. So please, Ripsime, your answers. Marina, thank you very much for your review. As for the first point, I will take this recommendation into account in my further studies. As for the second point, the postal reporting, the tiny companies in PISA use two types of balances: internal trial balance and external, that is the reporting that is provided to the general office by a courier or by mail, and this reporting is performed on separate pages. That's why we call it this way. And all the books in different companies closed at the end of the period and were opened at the start of the new period under new ledger. And as for general ledgers and trial balance, by the end of the accounting period, they had two coordinates: where the final balance comes from and where it is transferred. Thus, the closing and the opening general ledgers are interconnected. Thank you. And I give the floor to Vyacheslav Sokolov to give his review on the thesis. Thank you. You see, this new order of defense really raises a lot of questions, because the review was already published. It is available to anyone, and if I say something new, I believe you would tell me that there is a kind of cognitive misunderstanding, and that would be very strange. And therefore, as we have the following order, I believe it is a rather strange order, I'll have it this way. You know, they read this, how they read these reviews to monographs. Everything is good, everything is okay, everything is wonderful, and I will quote just my remarks, my comments on the thesis. On page 43, there is an example of calculation of the results on a specific transaction, and in the example you have it that as for the debit, it has the full cost of sales, the cost of purchase, namely. So these are florins, I believe. I'm not sure whether to make a stress, florin or florin. And then somehow you make this connection, and as a result we have it that what I see today in the work, it looks like a transition from expenses to profits. It's rather strange. Maybe that's internal turnover or something like that, but it seems strange. Second point, it seems to me that the author should have explained it somehow, why it happens like that, because I didn't understand it then. When he described the structure of the trial balance in this creditors section, there are these reserves from revenues. Why do they come in this creditors part? I believe that's a kind of contemporary vision when reserves are given as creditors. I did not understand it because I believe that contradicts traditional European or Italian approach. Creditor is a creditor and reserve is a counter asset, as far as I believe. And the last thing that I wanted to mention is that the photos of the archive documents are really hard to read. I know that there are problems with taking photos, with their placement on paper. But you know, that's like Akojava said, that it's very hard to go through such books, to read, to flick through such books. It's really hard to understand what's written here on these photos of books. It's clear that the quality is not the fault of our candidate, but still it's rather hard to understand what's written here. Therefore, you have to believe the author that everything is written correctly, that the photo is a correct one. I'm not an expert here because the candidate knows the topic much better than I do. She visited the Italian archives. I never went there. Therefore, I believe everything is correct. Though it seems to me, I'm not sure whether you have a more modern description of such archives, where we would have a translation, but because I believe it would be useful. But as for your enthusiasm, as for your eagerness to read these books, I believe you deserve the academic degree of the candidate of science in economics, and I'll vote for that. Ripsime, please, you have the floor. Vyacheslav Yaroslavich, thank you very much for your review. This question frequently arises among the reviewers of publications that are dedicated to the Datini archives, and in this regard, in the recent works of Professor Kuter and Associate Professor Gorska, so there is an offer to divide operational revenues into this into the calculated ones, and this word profit was not voiced, and we can't exclude that it was some kind of closed commercial trade information. And as for the second remark, thank you very much. But the thing is that this point was not voiced as an element of scientific novelty. It was already described in the studies of Associate Professor Gorska, and I give it as a reference. And as for your third remark, it's quite fair, but unfortunately not medieval books are stored in an ideal condition. This really complicated the research. Thank you. Thank you very much. In my review on the topic, I would like to mention that a lot was mentioned today on the fact that this dissertation is based on a very in-depth archive research, and a lot of materials were collected in the archives. But it's important not just to collect the documents in the archives, but it's also important to take into account the fact that the author interprets this material. The author does not just give this material, but tries to offer a kind of concept, independent concept for this historic experience. And the author tries to restore the logic of development of accounting at that period of time. And above all, the author is based not just on the archive materials, but on the scientific knowledge as well. So we should mention that the thesis characterizes the research that was carried out before the work of our candidate. And it should be mentioned that a lot of works are given that were written in the foreign languages, so we can say that we see no gaps in the publications that the author studied while working on the thesis. And I would also like to mention an interesting section in the work interesting sections in the work that are dedicated to retrospective reviews of foreign literature and the Cuban School publication. As far as I see it, there's a very good description, and it allows us to assess the scale of the research carried out by the candidate. And as for comments or wishes to our candidate, it seems to me that there is a certain drawback, because I would like to see a characteristic of those companies whose archives were taken. What is the first Datini company? What is the second Datini company? What is the difference between individual enterprise from companies, not just the legal form, but rather the work, the scale of activity, and why the different types of companies were established. Why did people need that? Then the author uses certain terms that should have been described in the text of your work, like dynamic lines of accounts. I believe it's not a generally used term, and you have it in a quite unexpected manner. Then the author interprets the trial balance formation procedure and makes very interesting conclusions, marking that this trial balance is located in the order of the drop of liquidity. But it seems to me that maybe it would be a bit excessive, because the contemporary practice is quite varied today, and balances are compiled differently. But as you analyze this order of articles, I believe that's a good point. Then I would also like to see a kind of characteristic of the considered registers, and maybe a kind of a scheme of interaction between them, and maybe a kind of comprehensive description for all the registers. If you would have this introduction in the dissertation, I believe it would be more obvious for the reader. And certain offers on the development of further research. The author mentioned the registers aimed at summarization and distribution of expenses. And it seems to me that that's a very interesting field, and I would like to wish the author to continue the studies in this field. And finally, the author mentions that this account of profits and losses was not copied from the general ledger and was not used in the general report. I would like to know why was it excluded from the reporting. Madam Lvova, thank you very much for your review and for your comments. If we talk about the organizational structure of the activity, the difference between the enterprise and the company was in the structure of the invested capital and also in the issue of accumulation and distribution of profits. And as for the tiny enterprises, the tiny was in the place of was in this place where the enterprises were located, so he was there and he controlled everything. And the company in Pisa was organized when the tiny decided to return to Prato. He chose a partner from one of the managers who worked with him before at the point as a hired worker, and he carried out the management and the compilation of the accounting books. And it's hard to imagine significant difference in the fields and scale of activity because the companies continue to work and continue the trade activity of the enterprises. Thank you very much for this remark because I should have paid more attention to that. As for the recommendation to include systemic characteristic of considered registers with the scheme of their interaction, well, I'll use it later on in my research, certainly. And also I had a misprint when I described yellow general ledgers. And as for Prato registers, the notebook of goods expenses and Prato book were given in the order of citation in the studied registers. They were not considered in detail in the work because we decided not to study them, but I will study them later on in my further works dedicated to the Datini archives. As for dynamic lines, the thing is that the accounting was done on one account that could include a lot of pages, and when the page was filled, the conclusion was being drawn, and it was taken as a balance to the second page, to the free place in this book, to the empty place in this book. And our scientific school recently decided to replace this term dynamic line by continuous lines of accounting pages, because one account is placed on several pages here. And indeed, paying attention to the distribution of assets, with this drop of liquidity, we compared with this issue with the Russian practice, with the Russian balance. And this and as for the stop of use of these dynamic lines, it led to the loss of analytical opportunities of this account. It became quite bulky, and certainly everyone was interested in the profit or loss, not in the overall general reporting. Thank you very much, distinguished colleagues, dear members of the board. Is anyone satisfied with the answers of Ms. Bagdasaryan? Okay. If anyone of the guests that came to this session, if anyone is willing to speak out on the session, on the dissertation. Yes, please, Mikhail Sakovich. We have 2 minutes. Suddenly we had very poor multimedia coverage today, and I didn't hear that I was given the floor. So my name is Mikhail Kotar. I'm head of the accounting department of Kuban State University. What can I say? We had one difficulty here. Yesterday when I mentioned this topic, when I read Professor Rover and others, and they said that companies resolved everything. And when we were dividing when we were distributing these topics, I thought that as for doctoral thesis, we will have the start of this company, and all the questions on the financial result will be resolved there. But it turned out that the first 13 years gave us no resolution of this question. Therefore, Ripsime had this most difficult task and the most pleasant one. The entire generation worked on that, and she managed to describe it. She managed to describe the top of the iceberg, the correct calculation of the result that led to the correct formation of the profit and loss account, and this provided the correct compilation of balance and reporting. So she is an A student. She is a very good student, an exceptional one. She joined our department from the early years, and she was always an A student, and she showed herself well in the on the PhD studies, and she also gave birth to two children during her studies at the PhD course, and I would like to congratulate her on that as well. Thank you very much, Mikhail. If there are no others, no other opinions, then I would like to ask if there are any online questions submitted. No questions. Thank you. Then I give the floor to the scientific advisor, to the thesis supervisor, and give us their opinion on the candidate for the degree and on the work. Distinguished chairwoman, distinguished members of the board, distinguished guests, I would like to say a few words about my PhD student, about our candidate for the degree, about her work, and about her. First of all, I would like to mention the importance of the studies carried out by our school. And as Ripsime Arturovna is a part of our team, she was given a separate good object of a study, and she coped with this work quite well, I believe. I would like to mention those separate areas of study that were performed quite well. I would like to pay special attention to the consideration of the balance structure, external balances, internal balances, the order of compilation of these balances, and also her study was aimed to study the procedure of financial result, and she coped with this problem well as well. Special attention was given to these corrections of mistakes in her research. She studied this topic fully as well. She worked quite well here, and I would like to mention that she's quite a responsible student, and she visited the archives quite frequently. She worked with the documents. She participated in the model compilation for the books that we used for this research, and she also frequently participated in scientific conferences and congresses that were held on the topic, on the history of accounting. She delivered her reports on her topic. And I would like to also mention that she published several publications, 5 in the journals cited in Web of Science and Scopus, and 2 publications on journals of rather high level. And overall, I would like to say that this thesis of Ripsime is a finished study. It's a good study, and I believe it should be assessed quite high. It should be assessed quite well. Thank you very much, Marina. As we hold our session online with our members that are working with us remotely, I would like to ask, do any members of the board, or do the guests, or does the candidate have a question, the questions that were not answered, and the questions connected with this work in a remote manner? If there are any of such questions, Please do tell us. So as far as I see, there are no such questions. So, distinguished colleagues, we have an opportunity to declare a break in order to discuss the results of our defense. Are we doing such a break, I believe? Therefore, I ask to turn off the broadcasting during this break, and I ask the guests that are not members of the board and the candidates for the degree to leave, and please turn off the sound on our remote channel. We will invite you when we will discuss the results of the defense. the dissertation board, the defense board, has discussed the issue of the degree, and I raised the question of granting the academic degree of the candidate of Sciences and Economics to Ms. Ripsime in specialization 080012, Accounting and Statistics, and I would like to remind you that the decision of the dissertation board on conferring the academic degree is positive, provided more than 50% of the board members, but not fewer than 3 people, voted in favor, in conformity with Section 23 of the Order on the Procedure of Granting Academic Degrees at St. Petersburg State University. So, Vitaly Kovalov, your opinion? I agree. Marina Sidorova, your opinion? I say yes as well. Vyacheslav Sokolov, your opinion? Yes, certainly, I agree. I've already mentioned. Alan John Antonis, thanks to your opinion.
Professor Samter, your opinion, your position?
Do you support the conferring of academic degree? Professor, do you hear?
Oh yes, I agree.
Yes. And I, chairwoman of the board, also agree with that. So there is no problem to calculate our votes. So 5 members of the board voted for the conferring of the academic degree. No one voted against, and no one abstained from the vote. And the decision on the conferring of the academic degree of the candidate of economic sciences to Ripsime Bagdasaryan in specialization 080012, accounting and statistics, is made. Ripsime, we congratulate you. And at once, considering the fact that our session is held remotely as well, I want to ask if the members of the board or guests or the candidate have any comments on the procedure that could prevent the decision-making process. No such remarks. So I give the floor to our candidate for the finalizing remarks. I would like to express sincere gratitude to St. Petersburg State University for giving this opportunity to deliver the report on my research. I would like to thank everyone of the members of the board. I'm really, so emotional. And I would like to thank my thesis supervisor and Professor Kuter as well, because we wouldn't have it without him. If it hadn't been for his fascinating lectures, and that he always accompanied with slideshows with his photos of the archive books. If it hadn't been for these talks about the work in archives, I wouldn't be standing here. Thank you very much, Professor Kuter, for that. I believe we can congratulate our candidate. So I declare our session of the board closed, and I thank everyone for participation, and please turn off the broadcasting.